Good afternoon. It's Tuesday, the 22nd of March 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. We will be joined by live video Skype link by Mark Anderson. We got there. Mark Anderson from American Free Press. And he's already told us that the weather in Maryland is about 45 degrees. That is, of course, Fahrenheit, if you're worried there's a heat wave in the States. And on the subject of weather, we've got a mixed bag. So Glasgow is quite bright, not too bad. Plymouth's gone hazy. Hampshire is sunny. And I think the rest of the country is a bit on the dull side, unlike British politics. Mike.
Right, so I wanted to lead off with this article from RT. Google this, Hillary Clinton and the Syrian regime change conspiracy. And this is, this article is highlighting documents which have come to light where Google is admitting, they're discussing how they got involved in the attempt to get rid of Bashar al-Assad. They were doing this by developing a social media tool which was designed to gather intelligence. So one particular email here which was highlighted in this article says, particularly damning is a communication from Jared Cohen, the president of Google Ideas, which was sent in 2012. Please keep close hold, but my team is planning to launch a tool on Sunday which will publicly track and map the defections in Syria, which parts of the government they're coming from and which parts of the government they're coming from. Our logic behind this is that while many people are tracking the atrocities, nobody is visually representing and mapping the defections, which we believe are important in encouraging more to defect and giving confidence to the opposition. The head of Google Ideas added, according to this article, that his organization was partnering with Al Jazeera, who will take primary ownership over this tool we've built. So Brian and Mark, but Brian first. This is intelligence. Surely this is the work of the security services to develop these maps. It's certainly not the role of Google to do this on behalf of anybody with a view to encouraging defections and regime change in a foreign country.
Well, I certainly agree that the security services are going to be behind it. This follows along with BBC Media Action, of course, where we've got the BBC's very own charity openly boasting of its ability to get into countries, including Syria, to help opposition forces overturn the government. So I think it's very interesting that Russia is picking up on this. So Russians seem to be getting a lot more savvy at actually reporting back into the system what their own intelligence services will be picking up. So this is the misuse of global media in order to destabilize a legitimate regime. Mark, what's your, excuse me, losing my voice, what's your take on it?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is that Eric Schmidt's attendance at Bilderberg the last 3 or 4 years, including in Watford, England in 2013, it at least suggests that it's likely that one of the reasons for his attendance at Bilderberg would be to develop this kind of off-the-grid intelligence by a communications giant like Google, as you say, instead of an intelligence agency in the direct sense. That's the first thing that strikes me about this is Google's connection to Bilderberg, and now Bilderberg being concerned about overthrowing Syria and similar regimes for their global matrix designs. And so it definitely warrants more of an investigation into the Google participation at Bilderberg and how this could be connected.
Mark, thank you for that. I read something very briefly earlier this morning, which I think was indicating that Facebook was, or it could have been Twitter, one of the two, were now hiding some of Hillary Clinton's emails. A number of people pointing this out, and they were posting some of the more pertinent emails which had come to the surface. But one of those emails from Ms. Clinton was openly saying that the objective in Syria was regime change and the overthrow of Assad. Are you up to date with that, those events?
Not with that particular thing you're referring to, Brian, but I'll note that when Hillary spoke twice to the Council on Foreign Relations since the 2015 Bilderberg meeting in Austria, especially on the second occasion, she seemed to be getting a double review from the CFR, which is the branch of the Royal Institute of International Affairs there in England, Chatham House. And so that definitely implies that Hillary is getting the nod from the U.S. interventionist foreign policy establishment, and they, of course, support almost unequivocally the overthrow of Syria. So a lot of dots are connecting here, and I'm curious about the Twitter and Facebook matters, and I'm going to look into those more.
Okay, we'll give you some information on that after the programme. The other email that was being flagged up was that the overthrow of Assad was part of a policy to support a greater Israel.
We might come on to a little bit of that later on. Obviously, the headline story in the mainstream media today is the events going on in Brussels. It looks like around 30 people killed there at the moment. That number may rise, and obviously significant number of injured as well. But that's taking the main focus of the news today. We should all feel safe because David Cameron is going to be chairing a COBRA meeting later today. He may have done so already in order to make sure that Britain remains safe. Now, it was left to Mike Hookham, member of European Parliament for UKIP, to comment on this. He said this horrific act of terrorism, which it is, shows that Schengen free movement and lax border controls are a threat to our security. Now, of course, this is a complete diversion because this has got nothing whatever to do with free movement and border controls, at least not at the core. That may be part of it. At the core, of course, is a geopolitical agenda which is being pushed through by David Cameron and Barack Obama. And the question is, who actually carried out this attack in Brussels today? I suspect it was very much a sort of 7/7 style event, and we may find that as we continue to dig that there would be security services support in this at the very least.
Well, that's already been indicated to us this morning, Mike. A well-informed source who would be considered to be knowledgeable on matters to do with security said very quickly, this smells of 7/7. So we're, as always, just stepping back to watch a little bit how things unfold. But the viewpoint is that already this thing doesn't stack up in the way it's being told. It's remarkable it's taken a bomb explosion to get UKIP to start properly talking about Schengen and the movement of people, Mike. But maybe they needed a bomb under them in a figurative sense in order to get them woken up.
Well, I think this tweet here really sums up how most people feel about this, because we are all pretty sick of this kind of thing. And at the end of the day, it is as the direct result of the geopolitical shenanigans of our so-called leaders. And so we're pretty much sick of this, and it's about time Western foreign policy was changed.
I think so. Mark, has this been reported in the States? Presumably it has already
getting
today.
up here, it's good and early here, of course. This is the first I've heard of this particular event. I'm sure it's in some of the news outlets, but we're just getting going here on this side of the pond. But you're right, you got to stand back and look at this. You can't take anything at face value.
Okay.
So, Mark, we're going to move on to some of your stuff now, because you wanted to begin with this article from Newsweek about the EU referendum and the Bilderberg influence on the referendum debate. Tell us a bit more about what's being said here.
Well, the first thing out of the starting gate is that Newsweek, being a establishment publication in the U.S., it's had some organizational connections to the Washington Post, which is a Bilderberg-connected newspaper. It's had those in its history, those connections. But here you have really, it may not seem strikingly newsworthy, but it actually is. There's such a there's such an anti-Bilderberg stance in the U.S. media. In other words, they're so reticent, they're so reluctant to ever mention the word Bilderberg. And here the U.S.-based publication Newsweek recently mentioned Bilderberg in quoting a British MP, one Philip Hollowbone. He's from the Conservative Party, as I understand it. And Newsweek quoted him as saying, that he senses Bilderberg's influence in trying to prevent Brits from leaving the European Union, the so-called Brexit vote that's coming up June 23rd. So here, finally, the U.S. media breaks its silence on Bilderberg, stone cold silence most of the time, in order to basically criticize Hollebone for blaming Bilderberg in some respects on trying to prevent Britain from leaving the EU. And so it's newsworthy when any American news outlet even utters the word Bilderberg. I kind of laugh at it in a way, at the irony. But of course, they're doing it in the context of criticizing anyone who would bring it up. I don't know a great deal about Mr. Hollebone, but he is kind of following in the footsteps of the late Michael Meacher, who, of course, in 2013 gave about a 20-minute speech and dressed down Kenneth Clark, a former MP or a fellow MP at that time. And Kenneth Clark, since then, he tried to defend Bilderberg on the floor of the House of Commons, and then after that, Kenneth Clark's name never again appeared on the list of the Bilderberg Steering Committee, and he never again attended a Bilderberg meeting. So I think Kenneth Clark spoke too much in trying to defend Bilderberg when Michael Meacher was criticizing it.
Well, actually, sorry, Mark. Actually, during that speech that he gave in the House of Commons to defend Bilderberg, he did actually announce that he had stepped down from the steering committee at that point. So that had happened right at that. That was a piece of news at that point.
Oh, okay. I'm glad you clarified that. Nevertheless, Mr. Hollebone is kind of following in Meacher's footsteps to bring that up, and it's a kind of a major breakthrough when any U.S. media even utters the word Bilderberg. But of course, there's the larger questions that you and I have discussed, Mike, and that is the best of both worlds document from David Cameron and his whirlwind European tour, where he's been tilling the soil to try and prevent Brexit and trying to kind of trick the British people into joining the TTIP International Trade Treaty between the 28-nation European Union and the U.S. And you've reported that well, and this Newsweek item is another plank in the overall picture.
Well, just to add to that, if I may, Mark, that we are hearing reports, very credible reports, that basically a challenge is being put together to challenge the whole basis of this European referendum. There are so many doubts about the way it's being organised. Mike has recently pointed out that this referendum is being orchestrated on European lines. It's dealing with the regions of Britain, not the county or the existing MP's constitutional system. There are enough concerns, particularly concerns related to how things were manipulated when the first vote was taken back in the early 70s to get us into the European Economic Community. People are saying, well, you're not going to do the same trick again. So we think that there is going to be a formal challenge to the whole setup of this referendum. And this will be very interesting because, of course, this didn't even happen in the Irish vote. People are saying, no, we're not going to be fooled. We want to take a good look at this thing from the beginning. We'll keep you posted on that.
Yeah, that's encouraging.
Okay, well, of course, while this is all going on and David Cameron is having a meeting in his snake's den, Cobra, of course, what he's doing out of sight, or roughly out of sight, is he's now started to dismantle the party system in UK. And of course, he's targeting the Conservatives because were the traditional Tories to start speaking out about what David Cameron has been doing in the country, he would be brought to a halt very quickly. So what he's got to do is completely destroy the Conservative associations. He's got to take the Tory party away from the mainstream Tory supporters. And the Telegraph here is picking up on how this is going to be done. Let's have a look at this. So we've got half of Tory party associations could be culled despite grassroots rebellion under Lord Feldman reforms.
Or should that be because of grassroots rebellion?
Well, it could be either. I'm first of all going to pick up the could be culled. I'll come on to that in a minute. But despite what Cameron is saying is he does not actually care what the reaction from his own party is. And this clearly says to me that Cameron now believes that he's in the position of a dictatorship, and he doesn't care at all what the party says. So probably the headline should be this, that the Tory party associations will be culled unless those blue rinse Tories wake up. What's coming is a subversive dictatorship. This is some of the comments from the article. Under the final proposals, only local associations with fewer than 100 members, which is 290 out of the party's 650 associations, will have to consider merging. So this is salami slicing, Mike. This is drift in the policy. We've then got that. The association will also see its costs reduced as it's relieved of financial burden of administering membership. Well, in a minute, we'll show you where some of the Tory money has been spent. And this one here, that since Cameron's been in power as leader, the membership of the Tory party has slumped. Well, it's halved from 253,000 in 2005 to 134,000 now. So Cameron is going for the destruction of the Tory party. And if we have a little look at Mr. Feldman here, he's got his name in the press over this. There was a death of a young Conservative activist called Elliot Johnson, and Lord Feldman's being accused of being incredibly arrogant and lacking sympathy. He hasn't bothered to speak to the parents of this young man, and the former co-chairman, Grant Shapps, has been taking him to task over it. So seems to me from this that Feldman simply doesn't care if somebody was bullied to death in the Tory party, is the ideal man to take on the activists.
It's an interesting development, isn't it? Because, of course, a big society is all about bringing centralised control down to, that's not how it's sold, of course. Yeah. It's all about bringing, giving local people as much control as possible, and yet within the Conservative Party, Cameron seems to be going the opposite direction.
Well, it's the inversion of the truth, isn't it? Big society is to give us more power. No, it's not. It's to bring the government control to the lowest level. So David Cameron's got to get rid of associations to save money. What's he been doing with the money? Well, let's bring in this Mail article. This is the meat of it. Free booze, claims of sexual harassment, sexual misconduct and blackmail. Welcome to David Cameron's nasty party. That's our comment on it. That's not the Mail headline. But we're back on this article. Here's Elliot Johnson, the young man who tragically died, and Tatler Tory Mark Clark, who's the man accused of the bullying. Well, this lady is his long-term lover. And what's come into the fore is that there were payments made, but this is all to do with organising Conservative battle bus visits to target seats. So road trips, here we go, with free booze, paid for by Tory HQ, became known for wild behaviour. There are also claims that Clark sexually harassed young female activists. So this is everything we keep hearing about the Tory party, dirty, devious conduct. But of course, when the subject is child abuse, then David Cameron wants all mention of that closed down as fast as possible, presumably, Mike, because it does directly impinge on the Conservative Party itself.
It's interesting just how the Conservative Party seems to be destroying itself from the inside at the moment. And of course, one of the main focuses for this was last week's budget from Osborne. There have been continuing debates in Parliament over the finance bill, which is what needs to be approved following the budget. And apparently a number of outlets reporting that Osborne was basically too scared to go to Parliament yesterday, and he left his subordinates to deal with the flak. Now he is due to be in Parliament today for the final debate on the finance bill, and apparently he will be telling everybody that the budget is a compassionate one nation Conservative government. It's the result of a compassionate one nation Conservative government determined to deliver both social justice and economic security. And you do have to wonder about the sanity of anybody that can stand up and utter those words, which are just such clearly, they're just clearly lies. Yeah. He's going to say that the Conservative Party has delivered on their manifesto commitment to economic security, controlling public spending, lower taxes for working people and business. And he's going to say that we know that those who suffer most in Britain, we know that those who suffer most when Britain loses control of its public finances and the economy crashes aren't the best off, but the poorest and the most vulnerable. So he's just off his head, really.
And this is the same Tory party that decided to remove information from its own website because it was too obvious that what they promised was not being achieved.
Yes. So he was due to be in the House of Commons. He may be there right now. In fact, he certainly hadn't made an appearance by the time we were coming on air. Okay, let's move on. More political shenanigans this time on your side of the Atlantic, Mark. And let's cover Donald Trump, because you've got a couple of articles in American Free Press this week. Beware Donald. This is really about how the GOP, the Republican Party, seems to be at least making some noises that they're panicking about the fact that he may win the primaries, and they may have to decide whether he will become their prime candidate or not. Before we sort of go into the detail of this, can you just, because we don't really understand the American electoral system for this, can you just explain how it could be that despite the fact that he would win the primaries, that the GOP may decide not to have him as their candidate?
Well, the way it would boil down would be that they would continue to level all this invective and criticism of Trump and try and erode his image, casting him as a racist, a misogynist, and all these things, and keep running Ted Cruz against him and try and get a situation where Trump runs a little bit short of the 1,237 delegates that he would need to secure the nomination. And then there'd be the upcoming GOP National Convention in Cleveland this summer, Cleveland, Ohio. And there'd be what's called a brokered convention. And without going into a lot of detail in the interest of time, the delegates would be free to shift their votes to someone else, in essence, and name another nominee. It's a little bit hard to predict exactly how it'll crunch out at this time. The main thing here is that these two articles that you're showing from American Free Press, one's AmericanFreePress.net, our website, the other's an image of the hard copy paper also available on the website. These are two versions of the same article wherein the upper GOP brass, particularly the neoconservatives, some of whom appear at Bilderberg, met secretly, much in a Bilderberg style, on an island off the coast of Georgia. And they did this very recently in the wake of the Conservative Political Action Conference, another big powwow held nearby in National Harbor, Maryland. And what they did is get together to strategize how they would want to stop Trump from getting the nomination, because they see him as too populist, too nationalist for their internationalist interventionist tastes. And so you had neoconservatives like William Kristol of the Weekly Standard magazine, a very pro-Israel, pro-war outfit, and the American Enterprise Institute held this forum, and they're extremely interventionist in their foreign policy outlook, and this is called their annual World Forum. Well, that's usually held out west in the United States, but they had this special forum off the coast of Georgia where no press was allowed in order to strategize on dumping Trump. And so that's what happened. There was a number of leading members of Congress there, the heads of key committees. Mitch McConnell, the leader of the Republicans in the U.S. Senate, was there. And across the board in the think tanks and the foreign policy institutes, and Karl Rove, the big strategist, the GOP strategist, was there, and he's the one that tries to come up with the tactics of how Trump would be dumped. So this is what has happened. Some people are even calling it Bilderberg 2, sort of euphemistically, although that might fall a little bit short of the mark. In other words, that may be a bit of an exaggeration, but it's even giving some hints, however tentative, that Bilderberg could be meeting off the coast of Georgia this year, but that is by no means confirmed. So that's what's been happening, and it ties into the American Israel Public Affairs Conference that's happening right now as we speak in nearby Washington, where Trump spoke last night.
Right,
And you
right.
might want
Look,
to ask
we'll
me
come
about
we'll
that.
come on to that in a second, Mark. But just before we do, can I just ask if we go back several months? Actually, the first time we mentioned Trump on this program, you were suggesting that there was a possibility that his role in all this was, in fact, to destabilize the Republican vote in order that eventually Hillary would basically get the shoe in. Is that still your view, having seen the circus act of the last 6 or 7 months?
That's an excellent question, Mike. As a reporter, I guess right now I'm taking a neutral stand, at least in terms of saying that's still a possibility, but it's hard to sort out. Let's just go back to that for a moment. Earlier in this show today, I mentioned where Hillary's been before the Council on Foreign Relations. She seems to be, if not favored by that foreign policy outfit, at least she's high up on their list. And so that suggests the powers that be are looking at Hillary pretty seriously. Therefore, it is still possible that Donald Trump, wittingly or not, is a foil, meaning that he would offer a lot of bluster and rhetoric that would drive minorities, Hispanics, and women over to the Hillary camp. And then he would create a lot of static and instability and controversy in the political sphere, and that would have a tendency to fragment the political party, as we're seeing with this meeting off the coast of Georgia, and that in the final analysis, through a brokered convention or through other shenanigans, Hillary would rise to the top while the GOP is mired in controversy and indecision. So that Donald could be a deliberate foil, or they're hoping that things will crunch out that way, is still a distinct possibility. It's also possible that Donald maybe decided he liked being a top GOP presidential contender for the Republican nomination, and maybe he really wants this thing. He really wants to be president and doesn't just want to be somebody's toady to be used to get Hillary in there. It's difficult, and it would be kind of irresponsible journalistically to try and make a total final call on this rather mysterious scenario. But his words to the American Israel Public Affairs Conference last night, their big annual policy conference, were quite disconcerting to those that are skeptical of the U.S. relationship with Israel. Trump having told over 10,000 people at the convention center where AIPAC's meeting, having told them that he is an undying ally of Israel. He'll go to their defense no matter what. He'll dismantle the agreement with Iran, the nuclear agreement, although later he said he'd strictly enforce it after saying a few minutes before that he'd dismantle it. And all sorts of very heated rhetoric in favor of Israel, which many accuse of blatant aggression, military aggression. And so here we have Trump pledging fealty to AIPAC in a very big way. And yet, just a couple hours earlier, he told the Washington Post editorial board that he wants a more non-interventionist foreign policy. He wants to put the brakes on the U.S. relationship with NATO, and he wants to take some of that savings by not getting so involved in NATO and spend it on U.S. education and rebuilding our infrastructure. So will the real Donald Trump please stand up is what I'm asking. We're dealing with a very, very multifaceted and rather mysterious situation here.
Well, sorry, I've shown this slide already, finger trouble there, but this article in American Free Press seems to be suggesting that there's quite a lobby among the American Jewish community against AIPAC.
Yeah, I covered a anti-AIPAC protest here Sunday in Washington, near here where I'm at, and there were about 400 people there along the back fence of the White House. The police tried to get them off the street into Lafayette Park. They wouldn't budge. They blatantly refused. They carried on for about 90 minutes. People from several groups, and what you're showing in this AFP posting is an audio podcast I did, excuse me, of a rabbi named Yosef Yosef Cohn. Pardon me. And he told me how the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community does not believe in a permanent Israeli state, and that they totally oppose Zionism, started by the arch-Zionist Theodor Herzl a little over 100 years ago, and therefore they believe that Palestine belongs to the Palestinians. They believe the Israeli forces should stop killing Palestinians, and that Israeli settlers and the IDF, the Israeli army, should stop bombing and shooting Palestinian people in homes and stealing their homes. So here you have ultra-Orthodox Jews, many of whom live in Brooklyn and other areas, speaking out just like the many other non-Jewish activists against AIPAC and against Israeli aggression. And this is what I found Sunday.
So just to finish with Trump then, he may be a supporter of Israel, but apparently he doesn't see a need for NATO.
Yeah, and more broadly speaking, he doesn't see a need for NATO, and he's talking about a non-interventionist foreign policy largely in general. So the question then becomes, how can you be a faithful defender of the Israeli state up to and including the annual foreign aid and any military protection it may need, and at the same time have a non-interventionist foreign policy? This is a question I'm exploring right now, but it's among these, fake left, go right, fake right, go left, rather confusing developments that are coming up right here and right now that I'm trying to sort out.
Okay, well, thanks for that, Mark. Let's move on back to the UK, and we're going to have a look at devolution, because last week, devolution, absolutely core part of the destruction of this country by the British government. Last week was the Civil Service's Devolution Learning Week, because the civil service, certainly individual civil servants, seem to be fairly concerned about what devolution means for them. So they had a Devolution Learning Week, and this blog post here from Andy Robinson, who is the devolution lead at the Department of Transport. He's written this blog post to ask whether people should be worried about devolution if they are civil servants. And he says here, I was asked to write this blog under the headline above. I considered other headings, but I decided to stick with this one because I think it reflects the feeling of many officials when it comes to devolution. And he goes on to give a dictionary definition of what worry is, Brian, for some reason.
Well, I think I know why. I'll come into that in a minute.
Yes. But anyway, Devolution Week then was an event with a bunch of sessions, and those sessions focused on the content of their devolution engagement plan. Here is the devolution engagement plan, the guidance for civil servants. And he goes on to say that the response from those who attended was positive, and it drew out examples of other interactions across departments. All this led to a sense that civil servants are not alone, and there are people that they can turn to for advice and assistance. And he finishes by saying, hopefully the activities of this past week, will prompt colleagues to think about their work and the effect on departments, and more importantly, to pick up the phone or get on the train and meet some of their counterparts. And then he asks, who's worried now? Well, certainly there are some, perhaps not in the civil service, but in local government that are worried. And this blog post on the Public Finance website really drawing some concerns about the effect that devolution is going to be having on the care system and the NHS. And they're saying that attempts to harmonise health and social care across Greater Manchester, one of the key devolution areas, could usher in a race to the bottom. For all the positive rhetoric that has accompanied Greater Manchester's devolution around health and social care, it's difficult to shake off the feeling that it represents as much of a threat as it does an opportunity, according to this blog. And I suggest people have a read to discover what it is specifically that they're concerned about. But I think it makes a valid, genuine, general point, Brian.
It does. It's interesting, Mike. The first bit that you brought up, of course, of the briefing of the civil servants was being done hand in glove with the Cabinet Office. And what a lot of people don't realise is that the government's applied behavioural psychology team, the nudge unit, was first of all unleashed on the civil service. There was a budget, if I remember correctly, of 34 million that was used to put a trial, which was into DEFRA, a very interesting place to start. But the aim of that was to trial nudging to see whether they could influence and change the thoughts and behaviours of people already working in government. And once you can see that's the model, what they clearly do is change the behaviours of the civil servants and then use them to produce the policy and the propaganda in order to convince the British public that devolution is a good thing. We should remember, of course, that when Prescott tried to get the elected regional assemblies in place, it was a complete and utter failure because everybody across the country said we don't need this extra layer of government. So I think this is nudging and on a very dangerous
level.
Dangerous level. If we're worried about devolution, we should be worried about the fact that we've got devolution, we've got a referendum on the European Union, we've got Cobra meetings, but we can't catch paedophiles in UK. Billions of pounds being spent on security services, but they just can't find those nasty paedophiles up in Westminster. So the Independent here saying Operation Midland, after spending several £million, is being closed down. I'm just going to put some comment on this because they've done a great job. Scotland Yard, well done. We've got thousands of abuse victims who've been speaking out across the country with irrefutable evidence. And we're going to have a good example of that in a couple of minutes. We've got Justice, trust me, Goddard, who's clearly locking down all the evidence. So what should be investigated by the police is now being probed by Miss Goddard with her team of charities. We know that the Metropolitan Police have been viciously intimidating their own officers in order to close down child abuse investigations. And now we're just saying, well, there's nothing to see. It's all over. And in the background, we've got local authorities that think a payment of £10,000, sometimes up to £20,000, but that is a suitable figure to pay to somebody who's had their whole life, career, family life destroyed by being abused. This is a scam going on in front of our eyes, Mike.
Absolutely, and the media part of it, because they are not getting to the bottom of this. Daily Mail here's headline: humiliation of the Yard after 16-month probe into claims of VIP abuse. Police concede there's not a scrap of evidence. And so they go to really take apart Operation Midland. And we've now shown 2 articles from different outlets saying more or less the same thing. This is right across the media now. The fact of the matter is that any Daily Mail or other journalist could simply pick up the phone the UK Coleman, probably be given the contacts of half a dozen police officers, some of them still serving, who could give a very different picture of what goes on within the police service with regard to paedophile investigations.
Once they discover the big names, the MPs, the judges, the senior police officers.
But it's interesting that it's not all police that seem to be having problems with this, because this is the College of Policing that the BBC have had to report here. The College of Policing saying that, contrary to the other rhetoric that's out and about there, that really this is all a load of nonsense and victims should not be believed, that the College of Policing are saying that absolutely victims should be believed unless there is specific evidence to the contrary. This is Mr. Marshall from the College of Policing saying that a significant reason why the victims did not report crimes was concern that they would not be believed. So we've gone from the situation that people reluctant to report what has happened to them because of the sort of cynicism and disbelief that they get from the police over the years, over the last 2 years, as this has gained momentum, have had the confidence to come forward. They've been slapped down in a particularly vicious way here. And of course, as is being highlighted by the College of Policing, this is going to result in people being reluctant to come forward once again.
Which I think is the whole aim. So they can joke with the victims about this. It's a public joke. We encourage you to come forward, then we viciously assault you. College of Policing, I think, is headed by a psychiatrist. So maybe that accounts for some of this. But also Sarah Thornton, the previous Chief Constable of Thames Valley Police, who, of course, assisted the cover-up and protection of abusers in Oxford and Cherwell Valley College. She moved through to ACPO and the new policing body, which is closely tied in with the College of Policing. Well, it gets messier because let's come back to this now, since we can see Midland being shut down. Scotland Yard paedophile hunter is charged with groping young girl and taking indecent pictures of a child. Detective Constable Chris Maitland was suspended from duty in November. This was the Mail a few days ago, and it's talking about this officer, not just an ordinary police officer, but a police officer working inside the specialist unit, supposedly there to protect children. So he's facing 14 charges, including 2 of sexually touching a young girl. Now, I want to bring people back to this because we reported it the other day, but we're a little bit tight for time. We've been having a dialogue with the Metropolitan Police, and this was a first email that was sent back in July 2015. And what was going on is that the Daily Mirror had reported that the Blair's government covered up or blocked investigations into child abuse where a minister was named. So we gave the article to the Met Police, and we pointed out that in the article it stated that Ms. Platt, who was made a dame in 2004 and is currently a trustee of NSPCC, has denied being told a minister was being investigated or being involved in any briefings to ministers about the Lambeth child abuse investigations into 1998. So our point, which you can see in yellow, is in light of the above, can the Met Police please clearly state how it has addressed the necessary due diligence and duty of care to the public to establish that it has, quote, every confidence, unquote, in NSPCC and its staff in respect of child abuse safety? Well, where does that take us to? Here's what came back. We'll read the yellow, which is the main part of it. Basically, in Yewtree, NSPCC was operating the police telephone line. So when you thought you were speaking to a policeman, you were in fact speaking to a charity, the NSPCC. So throughout the course of Operation Yewtree, according to the Met Police, the NSPCC and NAPAC have proved invaluable partners to the Metropolitan Police Service, taking a number of calls from victims. We have every confidence they have the relevant skills and knowledge to deal with the vulnerable individuals in the most sensitive manner. It is for this reason that we have continued to promote their number and that of NAPAC alongside our own.
So that doesn't mention anything about due diligence or background checks?
Absolutely nothing. It's a smokescreen and it gets better. So let's come on to the next one. We pushed them on this, and then we got this one back. Prior to joining the command, all staff, including agency staff and those on attachments, are subjected to an enhanced level of vetting and psychological screening designed for those roles whereby the nature of their work means that they, policemen and women, are exposed to circumstances and situations that make them more vulnerable to psychological harm and to assess if they're suitable to work in the environment. After their initial screening, staff will be screened annually or every 6 months, depending on the role they perform and the outcome of the initial screening. Occupational health support and psychological appointments are available to every member of staff at any time, regardless of the role they perform. Line managers can refer, or officers can self-refer. There is a close supervision and a welfare officer may be attached to a case. Well, this is completely irrelevant. This is talking about looking after the health of the officers concerned. It's not vetting for who is a paedophile pretending to be a police officer or indeed a member of a charity. So we sent back and we said, Dear Sarah, thank you for your reply. Your answer is unclear as to whether NSPCC staff working with the police join the command or work at arm's length from their NSPCC base. Can you confirm that NSPCC staff who work at arm's length, those answering telephones for the Met, for example, from non-police locations, are also included in that vetting process? Well, what we got back was extremely dismissive. NSPCC staff are employed by the NSPCC. The line I sent you previously on this issue stands. So basically, we've got this key question of why won't the Met background check NSPCC staff. Apparently, if you belong to NSPCC, the reputation of that charity is so outstanding, there can be no question that you might have been involved in anything a little bit naughty. And yet we're now seeing that we've got police officers accused of paedophile charges working at the heart of the child protection teams. Well, follow it along, and what have we now got? Well, we've got the Nottingham Post reporting that social worker Andris Longins has been convicted of 17 charges of child abuse. Now, what's special about this man is Beechwood. So he was also convicted as part of Operation Daybreak, which is the very investigation that Judge Pert said at the trial of Melanie Shaw that the operation was a conspiracy theory, Mike. So I'm a little bit confused that Operation Daybreak in Nottingham has now achieved a conviction. Where was this man abusing children? Well, it was Beechwood Home. Well, we'll remember that it wasn't just Beechwood because, of course, after Beechwood came forward, there were 10 more centres. We're now talking about 800 children. No evidence, according to the Met Police, for child abuse. And we bring in this, which is the original report on Beechwood. And of course, it was Melanie Shaw who blew the whistle. She said that in the 80s, abusers were abusing children at Beechwood. Rapes, beatings, sexual abuse. Melanie Shaw's been proved absolutely correct. But what did they do to this woman? They put her in prison. And let's bring in the judge. So here's Judge Sampson, who refuses Melanie Shaw bail, but he's been the very judge who's now going to sentence Logins. And it's fascinating that there's been an application for bail for the social worker. So we'll see whether there is another part of this. And we'll bring in this one as well, because we've got a Mr. Zadrozny, who was a parliamentary candidate for Nick Clegg's Lib Dems. He was suspended after allegations of child sex abuse. Well, that's now progressed, and here's the Nottingham Post saying, of course, this man's a Nottinghamshire councillor, and he's now being charged with some pretty unpleasant rapes. I think there's 5 of those, and he's going to appear in Mansfield Magistrates Court on the 30th of March. So no evidence of these paedophile actions at all, Mike. And of course, the victims that have come forward in Nottingham, like many other areas, all refer to senior members of the establishment and politicians being involved in the abuse. Mark, we do apologise that the British government is such a filthy organisation and causing such trouble in the world and dragging the Americans into the business.
Well, the Nebraska affair of the 1980s, particularly during the Reagan years, you had children being bought and sold, child trafficking to serve the lusts and strange predilections of the mighty and powerful. Even taking them to the White House, as the Washington Times revealed way back then. And it tied a Omaha, Nebraska credit union owner with being part of this ring, this child trafficking ring, with even satanic overtones to the whole affair. And that was documented by a Nebraska state senator. And so the U.S. has its history with this as well. And oftentimes what you find, of course, is that this is deliberately done to tarnish and compromise as many legislators and other government officials as possible, so they'll stay in line for fear of being exposed as a pedophile or a child trafficker. Therefore, they're going to stay in line in terms of approving the legislation that the establishment wants.
Well, totally agree with that. And of course, we've shown the unique footage of a Tory whip, a Conservative Party whip, Mr. Tim Fortescue, who was happy to say on camera that when the MPs came to him with problems relating to little boys, he helped cover up and fix it so they would do as they're told. That was on a BBC film footage, so there's no secret about it. And we'll end on the notes that David Cameron's Nasty Party has said they're very happy for unaccompanied children from Syria and other locations to come into Britain, where they'll be totally safe within the care system that David Cameron and his cronies run. Pretty sickening stuff. Mark, any last minute comments from you on any subject you'd like?
Well, your viewers can check out AmericanFreePress.net to see more about what I talked about earlier today. The Donald Trump enigma continues, and it's going to be challenging to sort out, will the real Donald Trump please stand up? What are we dealing with here? Are we dealing with an interventionist, a non-interventionist, a foil who will bestow the presidency to CFR-backed Hillary Clinton, or a real populist that will try and make America great again, as he says? Unfortunately, things aren't as clear as they should be, and I'm going to try and clear that up.
Okay. Well, Mark, thank you as always very much for joining us. It's been excellent. I hope you have a good day and the weather improves a little bit over there, maybe climbs above 45 degrees. That's it from us. We will be back at same time tomorrow. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.